Hi everyone, it's Christina Escobar, founder and editor of Represent Classical. In this episode of Conversations, I speak with Jerod Impichchaachaaha Tate. He's an extraordinary composer who is based out of Oklahoma City. He is a citizen of the Chickasaw Nation, and he's dedicated his life's work to the development of American Indian classical composition. His commissioned works have been performed throughout the United States and Canada by major symphony orchestras and notable ensembles. He's held composer-in-residence roles for League of American Orchestra and New Music USA. He's also an educator. We talk a little bit about his work working with Native American high school students, teaching composition at the Chickasaw Summer Arts Academy, and his forthcoming work, which is going to include Cultural Ambassador for the U.S. Department of State and also a forthcoming opera that he's writing. I hope you enjoy this discussion that we had. We had a great talk. We talked about his creative process, his journey throughout conservatory, and so much more. Thank you so much for watching this episode of Conversations, and I hope you subscribe for more. So you grew up in Oklahoma, and you come from a musical family. And I wanted to ask you a little bit, like, when did you get your start in music personally?
Well, that's a good question. It's really funny. As I get older and I look back, my gratitude to what I was exposed to it just increases. I mean, I feel very fortunate of what I've been exposed to in so many ways in my life, and just how much has provided what I stand on today. It's really, really quite incredible. So my gratitude and appreciation towards my parents, my grandparents, it just grows every day. So you're just making me feel nostalgic when I think about, origin stories, for everybody is always very important. My father, Charles, is Chickasaw from Oklahoma, and Dad professionally graduated OU Law. And he's an attorney, but a retired special district judge, tribal judge. He was counsel to our tribal legislature. Dad is also author to our current Chickasaw Constitution. Every tribe has its own individual constitution that's in tandem with the U.S. Constitution. So we literally have dual citizenship in this country. And so so Dad is very important with that. So politically, I grew up with a lot of great historical and political knowledge as a kid. But Dad is also a classically trained baritone and pianist. And he is fabulous. I mean, so I grew up with my Chickasaw father singing and playing repertoire in the house. And so, and I started the piano with Dad, and then immediately went into lessons when I was 8. And within 3 months, I had announced to my parents that I was to be a concert pianist. I was in. And so, now my mother, Patricia, was Manx Irish from Nebraska, and Mom was a professional choreographer and dancer. And so my parents met in the theater. And so with Mom, I grew up, I call myself a theater brat. I was in rehearsals all the time. I was just constantly there. So I did my homework. When I was at school, I would practice and I'd come back to rehearsal. Whatever. I was just constantly saturated in all of that. And my dad, in fact, he performs today. He's 81 and he still sings. He cantors for his church. And he's been in local musicals like just forever. And so anyway, so he continues to perform. And then, but in my mom's rehearsals, I was just exposed to just so much theater and dance and a lot of modern American theater and dance. And it really greatly and deeply affected me and how I compose music. So, I mean, I identify very strongly as an American composer, of course, because this is where I'm from, but I'm also really in touch. My great heroes were American dance pioneers like Martha Graham, Ruth St. Denis, Isadora Duncan, Bob Fosse, Jerome Robbins, Agnes DeMille, Elvin Ailey, Gus Giordano. I mean, just all these people were in my wheelhouse as a kid. And so, and then Mom set all the traditional ballets on her students. And so, Rite of Spring and Firebird were in my mind. I was around them all the time. And in fact, I edited reel-to-reels for Mom, those ballets when she wanted to make cuts or extend something.
Wow.
I did that. I spliced Stravinsky when I was 12. And so I was hearing these orchestrations. And with my dad, I was hearing all this opera and traditional musical theater, especially for baritone singers, all these romantic leads. So this was just really in my wheelhouse as a kid. And of course, being from Oklahoma, I'm from a state that has 39 federally recognized tribes, and so my exposure to diverse Indian country is high. and I love it. I mean, so I feel very cosmopolitan as an American Indian, and so I just had so much music and sound in my mind from when I was a kid, and it's just all been there. And so what I did is I actually, since I studied piano, I went to Northwestern in Evanston as a piano performance major. And it wasn't until I was actually working as a staff accompanist at Northwestern the year after I graduated, and I was about to go into the Cleveland Institute of Music as a piano performance major, graduate degree. And Mom asked me to compose a ballet score for her. She wanted to do a ballet based on American Indian stories and legends from the Northern Plains and Rockies. And so she just looked at me. She's like, "Well, you're my Chickasaw pianist. You can write my score." And it's really funny. It's like I actually turned her down because it just bowled me over. I didn't see myself as capable of composing a ballet score. But also, I mean, I grew up with Tchaikovsky, and so I took this very seriously. So I had to really think about this, and it she really struck a chord in a very beautiful and innocent way. My mom was asking me to be all of myself, at the same time, and I mean, and I couldn't articulate it then, but that was the impact. I mean, it just hit me right in the core. And so I wrote her some music. I auditioned my music for her. She liked it, and so we went ahead and did that, and premiered that. I actually ended up leaving the Cleveland Institute of Music for a semester to come out and premiere it, and then I went back. And the reaction that I had from both my classical and native community was very positive and very strong. And I mean, everybody was just telling me, "Jerod, you got to do this." And I was like, "Okay." So, but I take things very seriously. I really thought about it. So I went back to school. I talked to Don Erb, the composition teacher there, and asked if I could be a part of his studio. And he accepted me, which was amazing. And then I announced to my family that I was to be a Chickasaw classical composer.
So that was your first definitive
Yep.
work that you did.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It was a ballet score for my mom. And I'm just, again, like, then it was overwhelming, and I was dealing, I was working through it. Now I'm looking back going, I cannot believe that happened.
It's almost like serendipity in a way, but then you feel like it's just would have happened anyway at some point. But
I'll tell you a funny
like
story.
I mean,
Yes, I do believe that. And so I'll tell you a funny story. When I talked to Herb, I didn't know who he was. He's a very, very important and famous American composer, and I didn't really realize who I was talking to. A lot of times I feel like Forrest Gump. Like I'm there, I'm like, I'm not really aware of how important the people are around me. And so I've just been very fortunate like that. But I gave him my score, and I said, I wrote this ballet, and I'd really like to do this right and be in class and and train. And he said, well, he actually was discouraging because of time. He said, double majoring in piano and composition is something I don't really encourage because of time. And I said, as a very young person, I said, well, we can do this one of two ways. We can either do this right and I study with you, or I compose anyway. Because I mean, and of course, it was, he and I got along really, really quickly, very, very well. And so, and he also had a very spunky personality, and we just got along so well. And immediately that spunkiness was like present in our dialogue, and that was transformative. Donald Erb really opened the floodgates for me. Basically gave me permission just to go like full throttle into what I was doing. And his orchestrations are epic, very dramatic, and very strong, very expressive. And our personalities just really gelled, and I just felt like I was just given so many green lights, and that's what I did. And so then actually what happened was very, very shortly after I started studying with him, I was commissioned by the principal flutist of the Buffalo Philharmonic, who was on the recording of the ballet of Winter Moons, and she and I were colleagues at CIM. And she asked me to write a flute concerto, and I told my grandmother that I was going to write a piece about our ancestors, and that became the piece that I wrote about. And that was the piece that I really just pulled all the stops. I felt like I had permission from every possible, area. And Herb really had a tremendous impact on that. Just, he was my current teacher, and that momentum really affected it. So that was my flute concerto that I recorded with San Francisco Symphony.
Oh, wow. That's great. You mentioned your grandmother, and it's interesting. I saw in, I think it was a magazine article, that you have an Indian name that was given to you by your grandmother, and it's a Chickasaw word for composer. That I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah,
So,
Taloa Ikpi. It's like Italian. Our language is descriptive, and so it's not like English where there's like one word for every
right.
possible thing. And so we and actually when we invent new words for like computer or laptop or
Hmm.
we make it more. It's like I said, it's like Italian. It's descriptive, and
Hmm.
so Taloa Ikpi is descriptive. Taloa is the word for a song, and
Hmm.
Ikpi is the verb to create. So it's you're making songs or making music. So that's where the
That's
name that she
neat.
gave me.
And this was like her nickname for you since you were a child, or?
Since I started composing.
Oh, neat. That's great.
Yeah.
Wow. Um,
Yeah, that was quite validating.
yeah, yeah, sure.
Yeah.
You mentioned, in another interview, I heard you talk about how your goal is to compose, to kind of express how you feel as being native and being a Chickasaw composer, and it's very like, I guess you could say, sort of a very personal in that sense to you. So if you could talk a little bit more about that sort of
Sure.
perspective, that personal perspective.
Ab- Absolutely. Well, art is very personal
Mhm,
so-
mhm,
to everybody. And so that's just that's the nature of the game. And also identity is probably the most important thing in human existence. And so when we're artists, we're abstracting our identity is
mhm,
literally what we're doing. And even traditional art, like when we think of like traditional art, like 1,000 years ago or something like that, that was modern art of the time,
mhm,
and people
mhm,
were expressing their identity. So when I think of ancient Chickasaw artists, I mean, I just feel like a week has gone by. I mean, they're just as alive and present as they were then, and I feel the same way about Mozart. I mean, I
mhm,
think I see him as a contemporary colleague. And so I just, so to me, time is very fluid on that sense. And the reason I say that is because um, all of the great artists that influence me focus on their identity in spades. And
mhm,
many of them focus on their ethnic and national identities,
mhm,
and that's something that I gravitated towards. And of course, you can imagine it's like you got somebody like Claude Debussy, who was unbelievably French.
mhm,
Toru Takemitsu was incredibly Japanese in his orchestrations. Chinri Ung, Cambodian composer, and I mean, and then of course Beethoven. You couldn't be more German than
mhm,
Beethoven. And so then with all the great ballets, all those Russian composers were just Russian to the core. And so I was very inspired by that type of expression. And also, Prokofiev was a really good example of somebody who was able to, he was so comfortable with himself that he would express ethnic tunes from Russia either as really straight up, like Hebrew style tunes, or something very, very abstracted, like in his wartime piano sonatas. I mean, he just didn't, he
mhm,
felt comfortable with the gamut and he had all that language. And I feel really inspired by and given permission to do that. And of course, then Bartok became a very, very important
mhm,
figure to me because Bartok, was the first ethnomusicologist of his
mhm,
own people, and a classically trained pianist. And so I felt a real parallel and kinship to that. And he went out with the wax roll recorder that he had
mhm,
received, and his first works sounded really just like Franz Liszt, who was his hero of the time. But Liszt's music was much more cosmopolitan, like Chopin. It was very
mhm,
Chopin-esque in that sense. And so, but then when Bartok grabbed that whole ethnomusicological approach to himself, that's when he had a very big paradigm shift in his composing, and it was significant and wonderful,
mhm,
beautifully deep, and personal. That's where he found his real stamp of identity on his music.
mhm,
So I'm very inspired by that. So I'm constantly transcribing native tunes from North America, and I
mhm.
do the same thing that Bach did to
Right.
Bartok, and that is I will make inversions and a retrograde, and I will augment and diminish intervals or rhythms, or you take fragments, that kind of thing. So I abstract like any modern artist does and has done for millennium.
Mhm. Yeah.
Mhm.
Um, you know, Basically, I remember you talking about this. Uh, Basically, you were saying, I think it was the same interview I was watching, where you were saying, you want to be known as a Chickasaw composer, but you also want to be known as a composer. So there's
Yeah.
that sort of duality where, you want to be known as a good composer. You want to be known that your music is good.
Mhm.
And obviously it is, it's very well, well acclaimed. You've been, your works have been performed by major orchestras. But one thing that struck me that I was thinking about when I heard you say that was my family and I went to Millennium Park in 2019 to see Yo-Yo Ma perform the six suites, the cello suites, the Bach cello suites. And it was such a wonderful moment, not only just to hear him play, but because I think it was, September, was so warm out. And it was, if I don't know if you've been into Millennium Park, but it's this massive place. It's a massive place, and it has this massive lawn and a massive amphitheater. And, it's free. Everybody just comes and, a first come, first serve. We got a seat in the grass, but there were people, it was a weeknight. There were people who came to the concert with their work clothes on, with a backpack, with their work bag, whatever, and just standing room only. It was just the most I've ever seen it packed. It was standing room only. And I remember thinking while we were listening, they came to see Yo-Yo Ma because it's Yo-Yo Ma, and he's a superstar. He's an absolute superstar, and he's extraordinary player. And, and this is not at all a knock on him at all. But they stayed because of the Bach. They stayed to hear Bach because it was, you're not going to stand in your work suit or work clothes in the hot sun with your backpack. I mean, it's at some point you might, sort of get a little bit fatigued or whatever, but the music is what kept them there. And I thought that was really interesting because, you were talking about how, you want to do the music so that the music is what you're known for. But I thought that was an interesting, kind of jarred my memory back to that moment.
Well, it's a really good point. I see it as a real kind of like a partnership between the performers and the composers. Of course, Yo-Yo Ma is unbelievable, and at the same time, if he played poorly composed music all the time, people would stop going to see him.
Exactly.
They would have the same enthusiasm because they'd be like, "Wow, you're this great player. Why are you playing this poorly composed music?" I mean, and of course, we all have that standard in all kinds of aspects in our lives. I mean, it's like we have that standard with cars, with food, with movies, clothes, that kind of thing. And so if we're going to invest, our money or our effort into things a lot, it's a natural human thing to want to have the best and to seek the best. We want friendships like that. We want good friendships, I mean, all kinds of things. That's just part of our human nature. And so I think it's a really good example. I've never heard anybody articulate it like that, but I agree with that. It's a partnership. You have to have good music and good playing at the same time.
Yeah. And I think that was the first time that actually dawned on me because it was such a lengthy concert and just noticing just the wide variety of people who showed up. And I thought, wow, this many people know Yo-Yo Ma. Like it was incredible. And then I thought, like most concerts, that you might see some people trickle out, and you didn't, which was so interesting. And I thought, there's something about that, So, but yeah, it was a pretty incredible moment. But talking about the music that you've composed, audiences want to hear this, and audiences are excited for this. And that's always the thing is do the organizers of the organizers and administrators, do they want to give people the chance to hear this music from different composers? And are you finding out that there is even more so a growing enthusiasm for your music? Obviously, it's been very well received, but are you finding that it's even more if that interest is growing?
Yeah, I'm feeling kind of a normal bell curve on that based on my age and how long I've been here. And I mean, I'm staying focused, and I keep myself under the thumb about like if I'm hoping to constantly push myself artistically. So at this age, I feel like things are happening, I guess, career-wise in a way that makes sense, that I was hoping for, and that kind of thing. And so the answer is yes. And I mean, of course, there's been a little extra. I guess fuel injection in terms of the BIPOC thing, with stuff that's been going on. But fortunately, that was already happening. And again, it's like I'm glad because I do want people to see me as a good artist, as a baseline. And so I do feel like that people are programming me in a very sincere way. And I'm very grateful for that because there are a lot of very, very good composers.
Mhm.
There really, really are. And I mean, it's almost overwhelming how much great music is being created right now.
Mhm.
And of course, that makes me proud. I'm very proud of my composition community. And also, I feel very fortunate
Mhm.
that people have gravitated to my music in the way they have. And, of course, I mean, it's really nice to know that people are identifying that it's making them feel,
Mhm.
so that's great. That's yay, yay.
Mhm.
Go
Yeah.
team. It's like that's a multiple win. So of course I feel really very grateful for that.
Mhm.
And yes, it's been happening basically naturally.
That's good. That's good. And working with musicians, I know in a lot of your work, you use native instruments. And do you, I would assume, I mean, I don't know, but do you call in musicians from the community who are more, like, I don't know if I want to use the word virtuoso, but more seasoned with those instruments, or do you do a little bit more of sort of education with the members of the ensembles or orchestras that you work with?
Well, that's a great question. It's I would say it's a real balance, I guess, of all of
Mhm.
that. And actually, primarily, what I focus on is percussion.
Mhm.
And honestly, and of course, I think about all the things that are going on. I'm very aware that percussionists today are extremely diverse.
Right.
I mean, in their capabilities,
Mhm.
percussionists are real modern people. They really,
Mhm.
really are, and they have such a grip on so many different things. And so that's a really, honestly, very easy resource.
Mhm.
Is the orchestral or a conservatory percussionist? They just know everything. It's just unbelievable, and they can play anything. It's
Mhm.
really so that facility is really wonderful to have. Now, having said that, all aspects of the orchestra are also amazing. And so now with the orchestra, what I can do is then I can modernize and abstract anything I want to and
Mhm.
know that they're going to give it a 90% like out the gate. And
Mhm.
so that's great. Now, on other aspects like some of the piano stuff or whatever, it's sometimes I will end up coaching
Mhm.
the ensembles for the mood and the ethos basically is
Mhm.
what we're talking about is I'll do that. And a lot like something really common in my music is in both the
Mhm.
vocal and string writing is
Mhm.
that I really ask for a lot of straight tone in their playing. I'm talking 95% straight tone in all the music that I write. And because that's how I orchestrate with that in mind, and I get a specific color. Whereas if you get too much vibrato and this kind of,
Mhm.
it really interferes with the color that I'm trying to do. So I ask them for a specific sound. And
Mhm.
then when I call movie string moments, when it gets more lush like that, yeah, I go ahead and, kind of bring in that classical vibrato. But that's something I'm actually really clear about, and I do a lot in my orchestrating. So that's something. But I like that straight tone that is associated more with folk music. But it's also very influenced by my Irish side. I
Mhm.
love Irish music. I
Mhm.
wasn't raised Irish, but I gravitate towards Irish culture. And I did, I mean, like Anuna is a really favorite group. My Michael McGlynn to me is a composer that I really revere. And I mean, that straight tone style is amazing. The
Mhm.
color that you get out of voices is incredible. So I'm very attracted to that as an orchestral color. But it's a folk element, and that's
Mhm.
something that I pull in. And so anyway, but so yes, there are aspects like that, and I will talk about certain things, and sometimes I put them in the program notes. I have
Mhm.
created videos and I've sent them to people to demonstrate how I want this. So like for instance, on the opera that I'm composing right now,
Mhm.
it's called Shell Shaker, and it is the legend of how we received our turtle shells, which is our primary percussion sound. It's a really important legend.
Mhm.
And spoiler alert, the shells don't come in until the very end of the opera. That's when they're made a deal in the
Mhm.
percussion. And so I've got shell rhythms that I'm going to be making a video that I will send to the percussionists to show them how to do, because I've got a 2 against 3 with their hands.
Mhm.
So there's a certain way that I do want to play it, and I will be in my studio and I'll experiment with how I'm going to do that. And so, but I am abstracting our traditional sound, but I still want that traditional
Right.
bass. So yes, that's a really good example. And I will make the videos to send them, and I'll be there at the rehearsals and demonstrate if we
Mhm.
need to, that kind of thing. For that, there's a real specific approach that I do want. So that shell shaking sound is something that I'm going to be very specific about when we coach that.
Yeah. Yeah. That's really interesting. You
It's
know,
fun.
it
It's
is. It
really
is. I'm
fun.
sure.
Yeah.
I noticed like in your music because, and I'm wondering if you think this is probably because of the background that you've heard and like sort of the whole, atmosphere that you developed in, there's a lot of, I would say, the theatrical aspect is very large and also like the, the sense of drama, obviously, I watched several of the videos of your music being performed, and it was great. In the YouTube description, there's a very, a very descriptive sort of explanation about the story behind it and whatnot. But I also hear that in the music, and I wonder if that's just you feel that is sort of imbued in there from sort of the proximity that you had with musical theater and of course dance and everything.
Well, yeah, I mean that's where the I guess the crossover between native culture and your I would say European theatric approach
Mhm.
is just completely lined in. And in fact, it's like when you go to the northwest coast part of Indian country, they have traditional structures that were for theatric performances
Mhm.
of stories, and so it's not. I mean, look, theaters all over the planet. It's been
Right.
in human history all everywhere forever. It's just been treated very, very differently. And of course now we have this incredible benefit of accessing so many types of approaches to theater. So to me, I'm like a kid in a candy shop. So we have an incredible array of American Indian stories. I mean, there's just thousands of stories that
Mhm.
we can just all choose from to focus on as an artist.
Mhm.
And so that to me, I'm just like, woo, it's so much fun to be able to dive in and just decide like what fun can I have today choosing
Mhm.
another, native story. That's great. And then in terms of theater, I feel so much freedom to approach theater in any way that I want to because I've been exposed to so many different types of theater that I just feel like it's in my wheelhouse. So I just feel complete in that theatric expression on my native and classical side.
Mhm.
I just feel totally complete with that.
That's great. That's great.
Mhm.
You were the founding instructor for the Chickasaw Summer Arts Academy. You teach composition. That was for with high school students. And then I also saw a really interesting thing that you did with the Oklahoma Medical Research Foundation, where you taught
Yeah.
the scientists for
Mhm.
10 days. That's really cool. And I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah.
How would you compare and contrast those experiences? Obviously, teens are different than adults, but what would you say about your impression of those different experiences?
It, it was remarkable because a student is a student,
Hmm.
and also artists are artists. So it's like my son is a really remarkable visual artist. He also plays horn and is in ballet. And so I my 7-year-old son is somebody who I respect artistically. And here, so I can respect a kid, and I can
Hmm.
also teach somebody who's 75. And so
Hmm.
it's a beautiful sphere that we enter when we go into teaching and playing and learning, that when we're in a learning environment with a mentor
Hmm.
basically,
Hmm.
because there's so much exchange and everything. And of course, so obviously somebody's a designated teacher and a student, but my oldest student for the Oklahoma Medical Research Foundation was Dr. Jordan Tang, and he was 75 at the time,
Hmm.
and an Alzheimer's research expert.
Oh.
And he becomes youthful in
Hmm.
his composition process, and all of them did. These are all PhD scientists. I mean, these are intense people, and
Hmm.
then but then all their explorative and insecurity parts of their personality came out at the same time, like it does for every artist. And
Right.
so they became kid-like. It's like, and then kids become mature. It's like so it all just kind of comes into this beautiful mix of everything,
Hmm. Hmm.
of your whole existence. And I that process is just great. So
Wow.
I will call like my older students my kids, just because
Hmm.
it's a very endearing thing. And then also my kids from the past are now in their mid 30s and
Hmm.
having careers and everything, and so they're still my kids. They're all my kids, and I
Hmm.
love that. But
Hmm.
it's such a beautiful experience to teach and to be a student. It's like I could be either one,
Hmm.
at any given moment. And to me, it's just one of the most beautiful experiences to have is that mentor student relationship.
Yeah. And
Mhm.
allowing people to express like that, I think that's something that we lose as we get
Mhm.
older. We get more
Yeah.
inhibited to express. So definitely being able to return to that sort of playful sense where you can just freely express yourself,
Yep.
like you did in your youth, which is something that you've got to do when you're making art, is to express yourself.
That's something that I'm really clear about as a teacher, and that is I have no stylistic agenda nor restrictions
Hmm.
whatsoever with students. So, like for instance, I teach a lot of American Indian kids, and they know what I do. I'm really clear about what I do. I'm focused on American Indian aspects, and I'm like a Bartok in that sense. But I make it really, really clear to them that I have no expectations for them to do the same thing. If they want to, I can help them specifically, technically with that. But I want them just to be world citizens, however they feel. I mean, there's as many ways to be Indian as there are Indians. There are as many ways to be people as there are people. So I believe that we're all a sum total of our experience, and so I believe people have permission to be exactly who they need to be as an expressive artist. My role as a mentor is to help them make it the best possible art that they can make it. So to demand the highest excellence out of themselves is what I'm there to help them. And I'm also their living encyclopedia for answers. How do I notate this? Does that work? I mean, just that discussion aspect of being a mentor is really, really important. And I've got to
Hmm.
be able to answer questions really, really quickly. And if not, know how to find the answers very quickly. So I'm their textbook and their high intensity coach,
Hmm.
helping them be the finest artists that they can be and
Hmm.
authentic to who they are.
Right. And as an educator, you can sense when a person is not sort of uh tapping into that's.
Right. And usually when that happens, it's because they're apprehensive or there's a
Mhm.
fear.
Mhm.
So it's not, they're not being like, lying, or is that you can't really,
Mhm.
what happens is there'll be an inhibition that I'll
Right.
detect. And so what I do is I go, okay, let's talk about that and let's see if we can open that up. That's so in that sense, it's a little counselor like, but
Mhm.
it's a very spiritual thing because I'm identifying, do I feel like they're a little concerned about that? So
Mhm.
what I'll do is I'll be like, well, what do you want to do? What's your dream? Like if you just forget just tell me what your dream is. And then when they express it, I'm like, let's do that. Let's
Right.
figure out or take a risk and so try to
Mhm.
experiment to see what you do. And I love that because a lot of times when kids take risks, they're overwhelmingly their response to their own music is that's so much better than I even thought it would be.
Mhm. Mhm.
Yes, that is terrific. I love that.
Mhm.
And I mean, what a what a great lesson in life to learn is to
Mhm.
take risks.
Right. And then they see something that they didn't think they were capable of. Yeah.
Oh my goodness,
Mhm.
that's so cool. And to see families
Mhm.
hear their kids' pieces. I mean, parents are just like, what? What? And
Yeah.
also, when I was teaching the older people, their own younger families, their own kids are looking at their parents going, I didn't know my parent had a creative, side like that. It's really wonderful what that does for families.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah. That's funny that you talk about you seeing your parent do something creative like that you didn't know. My mom, uh, she's still around. She's 83, and she was her profession was she was an accountant, and she went into that because in the Philippines, it's sort of she's second to the oldest. That's kind of like you're expected to get something that generates income, stable. So
Hmm.
she took that profession in college, took that major, but really she wanted to be an artist. And I didn't know this. I had no idea. I had no idea she wanted to do art. Never saw it, never knew about this. But my
That's
brother is a very talented artist, and I knew he loved to draw. And I never
mhm.
thought, where did this come from? So one day we were at a cabin in Wisconsin, and we brought a bunch of art materials with us because my dad liked to draw, my brother liked to draw. And we did, I did a little bit of that stuff just for fun. And my mom got, a canvas out and took a pencil and started sketching, whatever the nature scene was outside of the porch. And it was incredible. It was just like, I had no idea. She just sketched this whole thing, the landscape, the tree, and I had no idea. And, from that point on, I realized she's the artist. And my dad is also an artist, but she's the artist. And that's
Mhm.
where my brother got it from. And so now, as a retiree, it was ever since she retired, she loves to do watercolor, all this stuff. But that was one of those moments for me where I had no idea that I mean, I knew she liked to sing and whatnot, but I had no idea that she could do that. And it did add a different dimension to, what I knew about her. So that was really cool.
Right.
Hmm.
Yeah, it's good for you too because it
Hmm.
loosens some maybe some old I don't know, just it's just when you discover your own family deeper like
Mhm.
that, it warms it up. It just warms up
Mhm.
your relationship in a way that's really, it's hard to describe,
Yeah.
you know.
You
But
see
to
them as
have it,
more of a complete person.
yes, you see
Mhm.
more beauty
Mhm.
with which is
Right.
really remarkable.
Right,
It's
right.
cool.
The
Yeah.
last thing I wanted to ask you about is I noticed that this summer, and that's one of the that's when I had I had gotten, I think I got the press release or noticed the press release that you were named a cultural ambassador for the US Department of State for the 2022 season. So could you tell me a little bit about what this year is going to bring in terms of that role?
Yeah, there's a program they have called American Music Abroad, and they select about 30 musicians that normally travel to specified countries. I believe it's traditionally like 2 or 3 countries. I
Hmm.
think it's not that. I don't think it's that. I don't know how many. I think it was like 2 or 3, and they would basically give concerts, to crowds there, and a lot of them were kind of band oriented,
Hmm.
because it's a lot. I mean, it's hard to take a 100-piece orchestra with you.
Right.
Well, a silver lining of all the new Zooming and COVID is that we're so adept to being virtual now that this year is a virtual year.
Hmm.
They could have a symphonic composer
Hmm.
on their roster because I can play music
Hmm.
and videos of performances that I have for these audiences. And so personally for me, my impact is actually accelerated by this circumstance.
Hmm.
So I can see as many countries as there are days in the year, to demonstrate the type of art that I do. And of course, I'm really excited about that because the world abroad is all very aware of American Indians, and of
Hmm.
course, there's a lot of romanticized or just partially informed versions of it, and
Right.
that's totally understandable. This is an opportunity for me to go into their living rooms and say, "Hey, this is a modern American Indian doing modern art, and here I am doing this, and this is what I'm doing." And so it's just a great way, an opportunity for me to expose the world abroad to modern American Indian art.
Hmm. That's
Hmm.
great.
It's really cool. I'm so fortunate and grateful. And again, silver lining here. I'm really embracing that silver lining.
Yeah, that is really great. And I really look forward to hearing more of your music. I know that you have there's a performance in Tulsa coming up. I think it's the next couple weeks.
Hmm.
But yeah, I wish you the best of luck with the ambassador role and responsibilities this year and performances tied to that. And I do definitely hope to hear more from you. And when the opera is finished, I would really be, I'm going to be looking out for that because I've heard so many different pieces of yours on through the videos, and it's really impressive. It's really impressive.
No, I really appreciate that. The
Yeah.
opera is Shell Shaker. It's
Hmm.
the world's first Chickasaw opera. It's sung
Hmm.
entirely in the Chickasaw language about one of our really important legends. And that's being premiered at Mount Holyoke University outside of Springfield. It's part of the UMass Amherst college system there. Tin Hui Ung is the
Hmm.
conductor, is the music director for that. And so that's premiering March 4th of
March
2022.
4th. Okay, great, great. So yeah, we'll definitely have to spread the word about that on Represent Classical.
Hmm.
Thank you so much for this time today. It was really great to talk with you and just learn more about your work and learn about all the different perspective that you have. But best of luck with everything. And thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you. Chukmashki Yakoke.